Enjoy the show! I love platformers, so much so that most of the past few games I've had a chance to review were none other than just that. And yeah, I get it. I could be more specific in calling them out for what they really are, Metroidvanias, but that's besides the point. And really for this game, only a nuance. So as I was cycling through some more recommendations on what to play, I came across a few recommendations for Aeterna Noctis as one of the most ambitious and longest titles around, clocking in at a staggering average of 32 hours for the main story alone, well above the genre average of 15 to 20. You can already guess that Aeterna is a Metroidvania, and that honestly isn't anything new. But what is so surprising is just how much of a platformer this game really is. A clear standout among the dozens of other Hollow Knight inspired titles that for all intent and purposes make up a majority of the Metroidvanias that people recommend. A fact that holds true both now, and in my opinion, likely still will be a few years down the line. This was undoubtedly one of the most ambitious titles in genre, not just in scope, but also from the ideas that this game had tried to add in. A ridiculously difficult and frustrating game that at the same time had really some of the most satisfying segments that I can think of. So after seeing some great set pieces, outright unreadable boss fights, and what felt like 500,000 platforming deaths, I was really glad to have completed this game, and on hard mode no less. Partially because of that feeling of accomplishment from completing any hard game, but also just a general sense of no longer having to play anymore. When towards the end, gameplay became more chore than fun, with a really frustrating and unfun gameplay formula. And unlike some of the other Metroidvanias I reviewed, is one where I can only recommend to the absolute hardcore players as something that they would enjoy. A game that is certainly made for people that have already loved and enjoyed many games in this genre. Still though, while a pretty divisive game, I think it's still worth exploring just what this game is, what it does well, and why I'm so excited for the sequel. This is my experience with Aeterna Noctis. Aeterna Noctis is a 2D Metroidvania developed by the Spanish team Aeterna Game Studios. The story revolves around a pair of monarchs, the King of Darkness and the Queen of Light, who after being cursed with immortality, are trapped in an endless cycle of conflict and are killing each other for what is essentially eternity. The creator of this world named Chaos is responsible for cursing the two rulers after seeing the conflict between the two factions, and just like any parent disappointed in their kids, has condemned them to fight each other until the end of time. Each time one of the monarchs defeats the other, the winner takes the throne of Aeterna, and the other must reclaim the throne by recovering their power and reaching the castle to start a duel, constantly cycling between which of the two monarchs is currently in control of the world. For us, we play as the King of Darkness, who after being recently deposed from his throne and having lost all his powers, has to go through the same journey once again through the dark and largely desolate world in order to reclaim his power and ultimately gain back the throne. As a game, Aeterna is a more RPG-like Metroidvania unlike its Souls counterparts, and is, I will say, probably single-handedly the most platform-focused Metroidvania I've ever played, or will ever play, and its release is often labeled as one of the most ambitious and difficult titles so far. It's easy to see why, with a focus on ultra-tight platforming, a long game length, and an introduction to some of the most original levels in Metroidvania, that it would earn this reputation of being super ambitious. If you ever played a Metroidvania before, you'll be more than familiar with what Aeterna has to offer on a surface level. Backtracking, movement abilities, and a large interconnected map that defines the genre are all here, and Aeterna doesn't try to change that up in any way. But what makes Aeterna stand out from the rest is just how much of a focus it has on platforming. You might be familiar with games such as Celeste or Super Meat Boy, traditionally hard platformers that have a focus on movement and ultra-tight timings, and the same can be said for this game too. Their first few levels of this game were, I think, pretty standard and on par for what you would expect from any Metroidvania game. But as you progress throughout the game, especially after getting more movement skills, the difficulty of the game ramps up exponentially, with some segments requiring near perfect timing. The movement abilities found in this game range from the standard double jump to wall climb, a dash, and more importantly, a set of light arrows which let you teleport to any projectile fire. The platforming segment before the light arrows was honestly some of the most enjoyable part of this game, and was, in my opinion, pretty fair. But the introduction of the light arrow made the game so much more difficult. At first it was great. A teleport ability in any direction with so much freedom sounds like it would be so much fun to use in a Metroidvania, and during the first few hours of my playthrough with it, it really was. Having the light arrows combined with double jumping and dashing made some of the levels a breeze to play. The problem with it is just how clunky they are to use on a controller, as well as the design problem of giving the players so much freedom to move in a platform first game. There's no easy way to say this, but the controls for the light arrows are just downright clunky. You see, because you can aim them in any direction, you often need to rotate your left stick in order to aim at what you're trying to hit. And you want to take a guess at what else you use that stick for? That's right, moving! So what ends up happening is that you're aiming and moving in the same direction. Doesn't sound so bad, does it? And yeah, you're right, it wouldn't be if it wasn't for the fact that you're sometimes on a wall trying to launch an arrow in the opposite direction. And because you're moving, you can no longer hold onto the wall anymore and will just sometimes frustratingly fall over and die. And yes, I'm aware that you can press a button to make it so that you don't move while aiming, but why did they make it Y of all things? The button is so far away that I feel like I need a third hand to just play this game. But honestly, that's just a small nitpick for the light arrow, and while it is super annoying, it isn't anything that would make me want to quit the game over. What does feel bad is that by giving the players so much freedom and mobility, the level design of this game often has to compensate to it to make it a fair and challenging experience for everyone, which by itself isn't anything bad. But one of the things you'll quickly come to notice throughout this game is just how important the light arrows are to level design, such that the progression for a few levels is solely based on 1 to 2 very tight light arrow timings, which is fun for the 1st, 2nd, 5th, or even 10th time you do it, but not so much after that. You'll see this super often during the Undersea Fortress section with screens upon screens of light arrow puzzles that are more often than not super tedious after a while. But I can't even blame them because the design of this is necessary, since without it, players can simply just teleport through anything that they're presented with. And I think throughout the later levels, the developers kinda knew this, and it was hard for them to balance their game around this. So they have in these later areas that are just marked in a great darkness liquid where light arrows simply just don't work, which honestly did kinda solve the problem, and the sections in the Abyss where this is the most prominent in feature some of the platforming levels that I actually enjoyed the most in this game. And while the platforming levels were unfairly hard at times, I'll admit for anyone looking for a challenge, you'll certainly find it playing Aeterna. And it's a game I would describe as a precision platformer with a bit of Metroidvania mixed in, rather than the other way around. So I've touched on the platforming as a whole, but the levels in this game do a great job in showcasing just how many ideas Aeterna had in store. And I'm glad to say that Aeterna is one of the biggest Metroidvanias around, with countless areas to explore and plenty of quests to do outside of just the main storyline. But the real standout in this game is just how simply large the map is, featuring 16 playable areas to explore, ranging from mystical temples, a manifestation of fear, and space. Literally just space. Some of the level design in this game fit really well with the platform first philosophy that this game is really designed around, with some of the most unique level mechanics I found in any Metroidvania. And while I can't say that these are perfectly executed, I can say that they definitely deserve some spotlight. There are 2 areas in particular that stuck with me throughout my playthrough, the Cosmos and the Temple of Truth, each of them having their own unique gameplay mechanic that the levels are all designed around. In the Cosmos, rather than having a series of platforms to hop around, you're instead in outer space where these planets are the things you can land on. Each of the planets have their own gravity that pulls you in when you're within a certain distance of them, and the game wants you to hop between them with your jumps and light arrows. In the Temple of Truth, both the enemies and the platforms themselves can only be revealed by using the light arrow. Sometimes hidden, and often not disguised, the game wants you to navigate through this level by using your arrows to scout out and discover which path you really take, similar to a maze. And I just gotta say that, wow, I really gotta applaud them for coming up with these 2 areas. They are by far some of the most unique aspects of Aeterna that I haven't really been seen done in any other platformer. Very inspired and ambitious in its design and wanting to push through with something really original. However, being amazed at seeing it for the first time and actually playing it over and over are sadly 2 very different things. And it felt like that the gameplay mechanics felt at most gimmicky and at worst super frustrating and clunky to play through, each for their own distinct reasons. The Temple of Truth's revealing light arrow felt like that in almost every situation, you were forced to either slow down or to simply die and retry each area until you memorized everything, which not only hurt the pace in this game, but also the whole aspect of a more skill-based platformer. There are a lot of these segments where you're forced to go through what is a seemingly impossible platforming section, only to be ambushed later and forced to repeat the same process over and over until you finally memorize the correct path. And the Cosmos, while fun at first, actually burnt me out the most while playing. And you know, it wasn't even the planet hopping that was that bad. I actually quite liked it towards the end. But rather, there are these segments where you have to platform on a specific planet, with your orientation being based on where on the planet you are. Combined with the ice segments in this, leads to some of the most disorienting platforming gameplay ever. And in my opinion, this could have been easily resolved by just having the camera always have the player be oriented upwards, rather than the camera being fixed and the player's orientation be the one that moves. Sections that have you do long segments like this can just flat out bug out too, which really soured what I think otherwise would have been some pretty neat design. Now, while I do think that these two are by far the most memorable, the other levels in this game are actually quite fun to play. Especially some of the earlier ones inside the Goblin Village, where it's less constrained with having to balance around the light arrows. Though it did feel like that backtracking in this game was often second fiddle, with there not really being that big of an incentive to go back and explore to what you've seen previously. Still though, I think this game had plenty to do already. And for those that are itching for more platforming, there are these challenges that let you race around an obstacle course with a fixed set of skills, trying to beat both yours and other people's best time with a leaderboard system. Which is something that I really hope other Metroidvanias and platformers in general would add in more often, as this is one of the best parts of this game. Something catered to platforming having dedicated racing segments and no shortage of good platforming levels at all. So besides the platforming and the map, how's the combat in this game? And I think that can be summed up as extremely mixed, and it combines some of the same hack and slash elements of action games with some of the RPG elements found in Castlevania. And it's far from the more timing based Souls-like games that are found throughout this genre. The combat in this game can be split between two primary skill trees, the range and the melee one, as well as the gemstones, which are really just equivocal gear that lets you do everything from more crit damage to having homing arrows. I did my playthrough with a melee build since you don't actually get access to the range skill until a few hours into the game, and I think this was a mistake. The ranged weapon should have been given much earlier, maybe even at a introductory boss, since it would have given the player a heads up that, yeah, range is a thing in this game. As I felt like by the time I got to the weapon, it was too late to pivot towards using a bow, even if you could just respec. I'm also not sure why there's an emphasis on leveling if there's a cap on the number of skill points available, as it just feels super counterintuitive. It felt like that it's almost unnecessary that you gain experience from monsters in the first place, and I would have liked to see all the skill points only come from exploration or story progression. There's also no parry in this game, as you have a longer cooldown shield that prevents all damage for a short duration instead. But there is a gem that sets it so it's very similar to a parry in that it shortens the invulnerability time, but makes it so that it's a lower cooldown if you do get a successful block off, which I really think should have been what the game had by default. The blood weapons, similar to magic in other games, are a bit noteworthy because of how blood works in this game and that it's generated from mobs only when they die rather than on hit, which makes it less useful than, say, Souls and Hollow Knight. I think overall the combat in this game is remarkably unnoticeable, at least compared to its platforming counterpart, and felt like that it played a smaller part in this game than, say, other Metroidvanias. And that most of this game's combat kinda weirdly developed into a button mashing game at times rather than a more skill-based skill time one. Okay, enough about how the game plays. How's the other parts? By now you've seen enough of the art to make your own judgments, and I'll start by saying that, above all, this game has a really inconsistent art style. In fact, as I was buying this game on Steam for the first time, trying to look at the trailer and the box art for this game, I was left thinking to myself, what is any of this really? It does have a certain unique hand-drawn homey aspect to it that I really couldn't quite explain. It's got some great animated cutscenes that are fully voiced that do a great job in setting the tone throughout the story. But nonetheless, as you play and get further and further into the game, especially towards the end, some of the sprites for the enemies look, and there's no easy way to say this, like it was something bought out of an asset package. Which is really weird because this is in stark contrast to some of the enemies that you'll see in the other zones of the game, which feel completely fine. Seriously, I could put some of the regions side by side and you'll wonder to yourself if they're even made by the same team. The environments, however, have always been consistently beautiful, but suffer from some major overuse of particle effects. And nowhere was this quite as bad in as the Tower of Light. For context, in this segment, you're actually supposed to be ascending a giant Tower of Light that houses a powerful beam in the middle. And this beam periodically shoots out a powerful blast that shoots you to go to either edge for safety. A cool and unique level, if it wasn't for the fact that you not only go deaf upon doing it, but the amount of special effects and particles that the blast itself uses are so over the top that you really just can't see anything. Which is in stark contrast to some of the rather pretty and balanced environment that this game does offer. One of the best levels I've ever seen is the cloud segment above a rusted train line, where the bright orange sun during sunset combined with the subtle semi-transparent platforms into what is seemingly nowhere in the sun is one of the most enjoyable and tranquil platforming moments I've ever experienced, and is again an example of a weird inconsistency that this game has. And to top it off, during crucial moments such as boss fights, the environments and the particle effects, as well as the choice of colors, can mix into some really visually confusing scenes, where it felt like that the readability was often not even a thought during development. Picture this, you're playing through a level and you're on the final boss. You arrive at a set piece where you're in a lava-based environment, fighting a phoenix of the same color with attacks that are also the same color. And you can really see why moments like these can make the game just beyond frustrating to play at times. The one thing I will say is that in all of these scenes, you might have noticed that the camera does a good job in showcasing the scale of the environments, and actually moves in accordance to how big of a scale it wants the player to be, relative to everything else. And it does a good job in making the world of Aeterna feel super big, especially true compared to some of the later planet hopping segments that you're in. So while this game was promising and full of ambition, it lacked the last bit of polish it needed to be, in my eyes, a great game. That being said though, there is a sequel coming out for this called Aeterna Noctis, and I hope it does a good job in following through on what is such a promising platforming first philosophy by giving us the polish that the original game sadly never got, in the same way that the second Blasphemous game was to the original. Not a reimagined version of the original by any means, but just a tighter and more polished experience. And this is one of the most common things you'll hear about when you read up about this game online. A game so full of promise that simply overstayed its welcome, praised for its length, willingness to experiment, and ambition, only for that to be the very reason why it has such mixed success. Still though, I think if you're a fan of any platformer, you'll come to really enjoy what this game has to offer. And for me, going back and playing games that are more traditional Metroidvania-like, such as Blasphemous or Hollow Knight, gave me a newfound appreciation for just what Aeterna was willing to do. To try to do something out of the norm, and to be willing to take a step towards a new direction, rather than just be content with what everybody else is doing. And to me, that's a good thing. Something that we should all strive towards to not only appreciate, but to do ourselves. I know I've been going on and on about my frustrations with this game, but even as I was feeling worn out, I never once thought that this game was simply playing it safe, to do what simply everyone else was doing. And I could see the pieces of the grand vision that this game had, and the passion of developers had trying to bring it to life. So while I don't imagine Aeterna ultimately getting the polish that it deserves, I do have high hopes for its sequel. And for all that it's worth, to bring to a game a better experience for the ideas that this game so desperately tried to make work. So as always, thanks for watching, until next time.